The Hittite Empire fought Egypt to a standstill at the biggest chariot battle in history. They conquered most of Anatolia. They made Babylon kneel. But for 300 years, there was one enemy they could not beat. Not an empire, not an army, but a loose collection of mountain tribes with no cities, no kings, and no writing, who lived 2 days' march from the Hittite capital and who burned it to the ground. Picture the Hittite heartland. The capital, Hattusa, sits on the central plateau, massive walls, stone lions, royal archives, and just north of it, the Pontic Mountains, steep, forested, rainy, terrible chariot country. That is Kaska land. Here's how the Hittites themselves describe them. And remember, everything we know comes from Hittite records. So this is the enemy's file on them. Swineherds and weavers, no single king, no central rule. Hittite text complains that the Kaska had, quote, no tradition of one man rule. You can hear the frustration in that line itself, because how do you defeat an enemy with no capital to capture, no king to kill, and no army to break? Every empire in history has eventually asked that question. The Hittites asked it first. Here's the part that sounds almost modern. Fighting the Kaska wasn't a war. It wasn't a subscription. The royal annals of king after king record near annual campaigns north. Mursili II, one of the most successful Hittite kings, spent something like half his recorded campaign years fighting Kaska tribes. And look at the pattern in the records. The army marches in. The Kaska melt into the hills. The army burns empty villages, takes prisoners, declares victory. The army goes home. The Kaska come back down. Next spring, repeat. The Hittites built fortress lines, resettled the frontier. They made treaties. We actually have Kaska treaties sworn with whatever local chiefs would show up. Some Kaska even served in the Hittite army as auxiliaries. Nothing held for long. The mountains were a faucet the empire could not shut off. Then, around 1400 BC, decades before the empire's golden age, the system didn't just leak, it failed completely. Hittite records call it a concentric invasion, enemies attacking from every direction at once. And from the north, the Kaska came down out of the mountains and did the unthinkable. They sacked Hattusa, the capital of a superpower, burned by tribesmen the royal scribes had called pig farmers. A later Hittite text puts it bluntly, the land of Hatti was, quote, destroyed. For a moment, neighboring powers wrote the Hittites off entirely. That's its own incredible story, but the scar never fully healed. And get this, a century and a half later, at the empire's absolute peak, the era of Kadesh, the superpower era, King Mu'tali II moved the capital. He shifted his royal seal hundreds of kilometers south. There were religious and strategic reasons, but pulling the court away from the Kaska frontier was almost certainly part of the calculation. A superpower at maximum strength, adjusting its capital partly around tribes with no real king. Now let's jump to around 1180 BC. The Bronze Age is collapsing everywhere. Drought, famine, the sea people on the coasts, and Hattusa, the great capital, is destroyed, finally forever. But who did it? For decades, the textbook answer was the sea peoples. But here's the problem: Hattusa is 150 miles from any kind of coast. Sea raiders sacking a mountain capital deep in Anatolia never made much sense. And the archaeology got a little stranger. Excavators found the city was largely abandoned before it burned. The royal court packed up and left, archives and treasures removed. So, who torched the empty husk? The strongest suspects are the neighbors who'd been waiting 300 years, the Kaska. We can't prove it. No Kaska ever wrote anything down, but in the centuries after the collapse, when Assyrian records pick the region back up, the Kaska are still there, living in those same mountains. The empire is gone, and the swineherds outlived it. There's a lesson in the Bronze Age that keeps teaching, and the Kaska might be its purest example. Complexity is power until its fragility. An empire can lose one capital, one king, one harvest. A people with nothing centralized have nothing centralized to lose. The Hittites needed everything to go right. The Kaska just needed the mountains. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this Bronze Age type of content, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.